Imagine walking around with like a raging 1,000-degree furnace burning inside your chest, but you're trapped at the bottom of the ocean in a tightly sealed submarine.
Oh, wow. That is a heavy image.
Right. There is unimaginable heat inside, but unimaginable cold and pressure outside. And you somehow have to keep that vessel from imploding while just, going about your daily life, buying groceries, answering emails.
They hold in all that tension.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping straight into the earthly and psychological levels of the Vedic nakshatra Uttara Bhadrapada.
And that submarine imagery is honestly a perfect place to start. Because if you think of the overarching celestial forces as a vast deep-sea current, what we're examining today is how that massive energy translates into grounded, worldly discipline for you in your everyday life.
Our mission is to look at how this profound cosmic architecture actually shapes a human life, brick by brick.
Right. We're looking directly at the human psyche. Like, how does an individual carry the weight of that deep ocean? How does it shape their choices, their struggles, their health, and their ultimate evolution?
And to understand a person's earthly blueprint, our sources tell us we have to look at the fine structure first. We have to look at how this nakshatra is divided into 4 distinct quarters known as padas.
Yes, the 4 petas.
But, I have to push back here right out of the gate. A nakshatra is roughly a 13-degree slice of the cosmic pie.
Sure.
And we're talking about dividing that into 4 even smaller pieces, just a little over 3 degrees each. Isn't that, slicing the pie a bit too thin? Does a microscopic shift in degrees really make a noticeable difference in how you or I live our lives?
Well, what's fascinating here is that those microscopic shifts are what make us uniquely human.
Yeah.
The padas aren't just extra negligible details. They are the operating system.
The operating system. Okay.
Yeah. In Vedic astrology, these padas correspond to the Navamsa, which is essentially the D9 divisional chart. If the main chart is the physical tree, the Navamsa is the hidden root system. It reveals the soul's microscopic landscape.
So Uttara Bhadrapada is fundamentally about deep wisdom, restraint, and extreme patience.
Exactly. But how does that patience express itself? Does it look like a monk meditating or, I don't know, a CEO quietly plotting a hostile takeover? That is what the 4 padas tell us. They tell us how the core energy is filtered.
So it's like having the exact same software, but you're running it on 4 completely different devices.
Right.
Like a gaming PC is going to give you a very different output than a smartwatch, even with the same underlying code.
Precisely. Let's look at pada 1 to see how this works. This first quarter falls in the Leo Navamsa, which is ruled by the sun.
Okay, the sun.
Now think about Leo energy. It's proud, it's illuminating, it wants to be seen, and it is highly active. But remember the environment. This fiery Leo energy is being forced to operate within the deeply restrained, cold, Saturn-ruled waters of Uttara Bhadrapada.
So you have a blazing spotlight trying to shine through thick, dark water.
Yes. And the result is what we might call disciplined containment. The ego learns that it can't just explode outward whenever it wants.
Right, it has to hold back.
Exactly. You have this brilliant active energy. But instead of being flashy or seeking constant validation, it's directed highly strategically. It is power held in reserve.
Oh, that makes sense.
Think of that person in a chaotic meeting who says absolutely nothing for 45 minutes, just observing, and then delivers one sentence that completely shifts the entire strategy of the company. That is Peta 1.
Wow. They don't waste the light. They focus it like a laser.
Exactly.
So if Peta 1 is about containing the ego's fire, what happens when that deep-sea pressure is applied to someone's intellect? Because the sources say the next quarter, Peta 2, falls in Virgo, which is ruled by Mercury.
Right.
And Virgo is all about the details.
It is highly analytical and calculative. Mercury brings a hyper-focus on logic and organization. This is where the priest-like discipline of the nakshatra really shines through in a tangible way.
So they're very methodical.
Very. A person with this placement finds their grounding through service. They organize, they manage complex logistics, and they willingly endure hardship for the sake of ethical duties.
Like who? Give me an example.
You see this in people who organize massive supply chains for disaster relief. Or, the accountant who painstakingly cleans up a corrupted financial system behind the scenes.
Oh, I see.
The profound wisdom of the deep sea is applied directly to solving practical, earthly problems.
They bring order to the chaos of the deep. That's really cool. Which brings us to Pada 3. This one falls in Libra, ruled by Venus. And Libra completely shifts the tone from Virgo's analytical service to a desire for harmony and balance.
And it's distinctly passive. Here, the archetype of the serpent of the deep. which we know is the presiding deity of this nakshatra, explores life's mysteries with incredible grace and psychic intuition.
The serpent of the deep.
Right.
There's an objective poise here. This pada appreciates beauty, but it observes from a place of profound depth that doesn't rush.
So it's very calm energy. Imagine a seasoned diplomat who can walk into a room full of hostile negotiations and simply soothe the tension just by their calm, unbothered presence. They bring that deep water tranquility directly into their relationships and aesthetics.
A calming presence, but still very powerful. And then we hit the final quarter, pada 4, which falls in Scorpio, ruled by Mars.
Yes, Scorpio.
And Scorpio is intense, it's occult, it's mysterious. Mars is the planet of war. That feels like a very volatile, heavy combination when you mix it with the deep, pressurized waters of Uttara Bhadrapada.
It is undeniably the most intense of the four. You have an aggressive externalization of energy here, driven by Mars. But because of the overarching spiritual mandate of this nakshatra, that aggressive energy isn't typically used for worldly conquest or, like, petty arguments.
What is it used for, then?
It is weaponized for the ultimate detachment from worldly illusions, what the Vedic tradition calls Maya.
Let me pause you there, actually, because the term Maya comes up a lot in our sources. For a listener who might not be deep into Eastern philosophy, what does Maya actually mean in a practical sense?
Practically, Maya is the illusion that the material world is the ultimate reality.
Okay.
It's the persistent belief that if you just get that promotion, buy that house, or achieve a certain social status, you will finally experience permanent peace.
The classic trap.
Exactly. Pada 4 brings a fierce, penetrating drive to cut through that surface-level illusion and discover the absolute truth, whatever the cost. They are not interested in polite fictions. They want to get to the bottom of the ocean.
Man, it's fascinating how those operating systems completely change the flavor of the exact same core energy.
It really is.
From the CEO's laser focus to the truth seeker's sword. Moving outward from those technical padas, I want to look at how this energy actually walks and talks in the world through the big three placements: the moon, the sun, and the ascendant.
A great next step.
Looking at our notes for the moon, the sources describe these individuals as innocent-looking but possessing formidable hidden wisdom. I struggled with this contradiction a bit.
How so?
Is this innocent look a strategic disguise? Are they playing dumb to get the upper hand in a room, or is it a genuine serenity?
This raises a profound question about intention. And the honest answer is that it can be both.
Really? Both?
Yeah, it depends entirely on the conscious choices the individual makes. Astrology isn't a fixed fate. It is a map of tendencies and choices. On the higher evolutionary path, that innocent look is the result of pure sattvic harmony.
And for clarity, a sattvic state means what exactly?
Sattva represents purity, light, and balance in Ayurvedic philosophy. A sattvic state is one of genuine, virtuous serenity born from a deep, good-hearted nature.
Okay, so they're naturally just peaceful.
Right. They look innocent because they are truly at peace with the world. They harbor no malice. However, on the lower shadow path, that exact same innocent appearance can absolutely mask a secretive, highly calculating nature.
Wow.
Yeah, because a shield used to hide intense internal maneuvering.
So it boils down to whether they're using their depths to heal themselves and others, or using their depths to hide their true motives.
Exactly. And you can see this in how they handle conflict. On the higher path, individuals with the moon in Uttara Bhadrapada master their anger through unbelievable patience. The texts say they vanquish their enemies not with a sword, but through sheer endurance.
They just outlast them.
They simply outlast the opposition.
Vanquishing enemies through endurance. That is a terrifying and deeply impressive kind of strength. They just wait for you to tire yourself out.
It's very effective.
Now, what happens if someone has their sun in this nakshatra? Because the sun represents the ego, right? The soul's desire to shine and be recognized. How does a sun operate when it's forced into these deep, secretive waters?
It creates a highly creative, mystical mind, but it significantly mutes the ego's volume. These are people who are incredibly hardworking, but surprisingly softly spoken.
Softly spoken.
Yeah, they are diplomatic and carry a certain quiet authority. Because the sun is placed in this deep water, they are entirely unconcerned with being flashy. But again, we have to look at the shadow side. They can become overly secretive to the point of total isolation. The depth can become a vault where they hoard power and knowledge rather than sharing it with the world.
Interesting. And what about the ascendant, or the Lanya? This represents the physical vehicle, how they actually move through the world and interact with their environment.
The ascendant here creates a very eloquent, humanitarian, and deeply family-oriented person. They have an inherent, almost primal need to protect their lineage and their community.
That makes sense with the protective vibe.
The sources also note they are drawn to unique treasures and to traveling, often connected to the nakshatra's literal translation, which references having lucky feet.
Lucky feet. I love that.
But the challenge they face is fascinating. Because they're navigating such vast internal oceans, feeling so much depth internally, their outward direction in the physical world can occasionally seem hesitant, fickle, or constantly shifting.
Oh, so they look lost, but they're not.
Right. They might change course frequently because they are sensing subtle currents that no one else can feel.
That paints a really vivid psychological picture. You have this blend of deep-sea intuition, extreme patience, and an overwhelming drive to protect. Given those traits, where do you naturally find these individuals in the professional world?
You find them gravitating toward roles requiring stewardship, depth, and structural protection.
Like what kind of jobs?
They make excellent urban planners, charting out the foundational infrastructure for a community to thrive over decades. They are remarkable charity leaders, astrologers, philosophers, and writers.
Okay, so long-term vision stuff.
Exactly. And linking back to those lucky feet and the concept of traversing vast distances, they are frequently connected to the import-export business and the travel industry. They build a long-term infrastructure for the collective, usually operating quietly behind the scenes.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, because if we are talking about long-term infrastructure and patience, we have to talk about the ruling planet of this nakshatra, which is Saturn.
Saturn, yes.
And Saturn rules time, delay, decay, and restriction. The analogy that came to mind reading through these sources is that Saturn is essentially a slow cooker, while modern society expects everything to be a microwave. It absolutely forces you to simmer.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize the Saturnian influence. It demands a slow, methodical breakdown of rigid materials until they become something nourishing.
I mean, it's the astrological equivalent of being forced to wait in the universe's longest, slowest line just to receive a ticket to your own success.
It really is.
You watch everyone else bypassing the line, getting their instant gratification, and you're just stuck there. It requires this agonizing level of patience that most normal people would just abandon entirely.
It is deeply agonizing if you view it through the modern lens of instant gratification.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to ask why Saturn enforces this delay.
Why does it?
The delay is not a punishment. Saturn delays success to ensure you actually have the structural capacity to hold it when it arrives.
Oh, wow.
For an Uttara Bhadrapada native, the delay is fundamentally necessary to forge unshakable foundations. If you're going to carry the immense weight of collective stewardship or profound spiritual wisdom, you cannot build that house on sand.
So the slow cooker is doing the work.
The slow cooker process burns away the impurities of ego, entitlement, and impatience, so that when the success finally arrives, often later in life, it is permanent. It cannot be washed away by the next storm.
Okay, I understand the psychological and spiritual necessity of the slow cooker. But what happens to the physical body when you put a human being in that pressurized environment? You turn on the heat, but force them to wait decades for the release.
That is the million-dollar question.
Because the medical astrology in our sources points to some very specific, highly literal physical vulnerabilities.
Yes, the physical body always bears the stamp of the astrological blueprint. The two are never separate. The primary physical vulnerabilities here are the feet, the ankles, and the digestive system.
I want to pause on the feet and ankles. Why those specific body parts? Is there a mechanical reason for that in the astrology?
There is. Uttara Bhadrapada resides in the zodiac sign of Pisces. In medical astrology, the 12 signs map to the human body from head to toe, starting with Aries at the head and ending with Pisces at the feet. Furthermore, the feet and ankles are the foundation. They bear the entire heavy weight of that Saturnian pressure we just discussed. So, physical issues like swelling, sprains, or structural problems in the feet are common.
That makes a lot of sense.
But the most critical medical phenomenon the sources highlight is something called internal boiling.
Internal boiling. That sounds incredibly uncomfortable, almost dangerous.
It is dangerous if left unchecked. It stems from an elemental paradox. As we noted, Uttara Bhadrapada resides entirely within the watery sign of Pisces. But the native themselves, according to Ayurvedic principles tied to this specific nakshatra, possesses a pitta, or fire, constitution.
A fire in water.
Yes. You have a fire, nature hot, sharp, penetrating, trying to operate within a deep, cold water environment.
Right, this brings us back to the submarine analogy from the beginning. It's like a tightly sealed submarine operating near a deep-sea thermal vent. You
Exactly.
have this raging, incredibly hot furnace inside the vessel, but it is completely surrounded by cold, heavy, pressurized water. There's nowhere for the heat to easily vent.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. The disciplined Saturnian structure, the submarine hull, keeps everything perfectly contained on the outside. They look calm. Remember the innocent, serene moon we discussed?
Right, they look fine on the outside.
But the fire of their ambition, their unexpressed anger, or their worldly desires is still actively burning inside. The shadow consequence of this is profound.
What happens?
If this unexpressed internal heat isn't managed properly, it doesn't just evaporate. It turns into severe physical and psychological pressure. Medically, this manifests as chronic hypertension, severe stress disorders, and digestive issues like stomach ulcers or liver problems.
Jeer.
The body literally begins to boil from the inside out because the tension is actively suppressed rather than processed.
So, how do they vent the submarine without flooding it? How does someone safely release the pressure of that internal boiling to achieve what the sources call their ultimate spiritual evolution?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we look at the evolutionary objective of this entire nakshatra. The ultimate goal is the transition from kama, which is worldly desire and ambition, to moksha, which is total spiritual liberation.
Okay.
The objective is to achieve the death of Maya, to finally see through the illusions of the material world.
Meaning they finally realize that the pressure they're holding on to, like the desire to prove themselves, to hoard wealth, to win every argument, isn't actually real or necessary.
Exactly. But realizing that intellectually isn't enough, the body has to process it. To integrate this heavy pressurized energy safely, the native strategically must cultivate deep silence and seclusion. This is non-negotiable.
They just need to be alone.
They require periods of total withdrawal from the noise of the world. And it is crucial to understand that this retreat is not laziness. Laziness is merely a shadow expression of this star.
Right. People might look at them and think they're just checking out.
But true seclusion here is a required medical and spiritual practice. They must have silence to process their vast psychic sensitivity, to cool the internal pit of fire, and to successfully harness that deep-sea energy.
So, sitting quietly in an empty room or taking a solitary walk in the woods isn't them ignoring their responsibilities. It is them actively doing the heavy lifting to keep the submarine from imploding. It's a pressure release valve.
Yes. The silence is where the alchemy actually happens. It is where the deep waters are allowed to soothe the internal fire without the interference of other people's demands.
That's beautiful, actually.
Without that conscious withdrawal, they risk being consumed by the demands of the world and the literal physical pressure of their own unexpressed intensity. With it, they transform that suppressed tension into profound, stable wisdom that they can then bring back up to the surface to benefit the collective.
So what does this all mean? We've journeyed from the exact microscopic technical degrees of the Pasidas, examining how the ego and intellect are contained.
I have.
We've looked at the quiet, enduring strength of the moon and ascendant, and we've waited in the agonizing slow cooker of Saturn's delays. Finally, we've explored the pressurized submarine of their physical health and the absolute necessity of silence.
It's a lot to carry.
It is. The journey of Uttara Bhadrapada really is about finding supreme discipline within those deep, chaotic, emotional waters. It's about enduring the pressure, not fighting it, but letting it temper you, to eventually achieve a wisdom that is completely unshakable.
It is the ultimate testament to the power of restraint. And it leaves us with something vital to consider about our own modern lives.
What's that?
Well, we live in a society that is increasingly obsessed with constant, loud externalization and instant results. But if we connect to the wisdom of this nakshatra, we have to ask ourselves, in a modern world that demands that constant noise, how much power are you giving away by refusing to sit in your own deep silence?
Wow.
Could your greatest breakthroughs be waiting in the exact quiet seclusion you've been avoiding?
What an incredible question to end on. A reminder that sometimes the silence is the medicine. Thank you for taking this journey into the deep waters with us. Keep exploring your own internal oceans, and we will catch you next time.